Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again. My name is Amira Harith, student from the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. Thank you for being part of You Alive today. The program today is in 3 sections: a 10-minute talk by our speaker, Mr. K Shanmugam, a 20-minute interview with Viswa Sadasivan, chairman of the You Alive Organizing Committee, and then a 30-minute Q&A session. If you wish to ask a question, please make your way to the microphones placed along the aisles. Introduce yourself and speak directly into them. This is essential so the online community is able to hear your question. Today, we will be using Pigeonhole Live for our Q&A sessions. If you have a smartphone, a tablet, or a laptop computer with you, just launch your internet browser and go to phlive.app. Key in our event passcode, which is You Alive. I repeat, it is You Alive. Click Go, and you're free to ask any questions that you have, while also voting for any questions that interest you. The more popular questions with more votes will stand a higher chance to be answered by the speakers. Also, do remember to leave your feedback on the Pigeonhole application after the show. Thank you for your kind attention. Sit back and enjoy.
You Alive.
Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and present Mr. K Shanmugam.
Okay, now, I'm going to ask the minister a question, and then I'm going to ask one of you, I'm going to give one of you the chance to ask the opening question, so the minister can't talk about the things that he comes prepared to talk about. Okay? So, Minister, I'd like to ask you this question. You know, there's been a lot of talk about economic progress, the challenges we face in economy. We need the foreign manpower. If we don't build our economy, we're not going to get jobs. All that we have heard 100 times. Okay? Some people may even say it's propaganda. Now, how do you balance that with a clear call that people are making about the need for us to be able to live our lives and not continue to run at this pace? Are we ever going to be able to find a balance between economic progress, some argue at all costs, and saying, hey, let's start enjoying our lives? Euphemism for quality of life. Can we strike a balance, or should they forever remain adversaries? That's my question for the minister. I hope you will answer them squarely. Question from the audience, 1. 1. Don't be scared.
I don't think anyone is scared. They may be scared of you, but not of me.
1 question. One. Chance. Yes. You got to come to the mic.
Thank you.
You got to introduce yourselves, and because this is Minister of Law, you got to give your IC number as well.
I didn't bring my IC. My name is Navaratnam, a senior citizen, very senior.
I couldn't have guessed.
I have, you can see.
Yeah.
I have 2 related questions.
Ask
One.
the minister.
1, what's the likelihood that we will ever have a shadow cabinet in the parliament? Secondly, what's the likelihood that PAP giving birth to a shadow cabinet? By shadow cabinet, what I mean is a credible opposition. Thank you. That's all.
Okay. All right. Would you want another question?
I leave that to you.
Can you take one more question?
Sure.
All right. We'll allow one more question. One more question. One more question. While stocks last. Yes. To the mic, please.
Hello. Yeah, actually, basically, it's a very simple
Hey,
question.
introduce yourself, lah.
Oh, yeah. My name is Ivan, undergraduate of NUS in engineering. Yeah, just
Engineering.
engineering. Because actually, this morning I went to my internship days and I actually met one of my PRC friend. So actually, he asked me, why do I dress up on a dress out day on Friday? So I told him that I'm attending a talk by a law minister, current law minister of Singapore. So this question is actually by him. So the first question, he was shocked. So he was asking me, so why is there a law minister in Singapore? So basically, I was shocked because basically the source of this question is from a PRC, which isn't as democratic as Singapore. And in a sense that when he asked that question, he actually carried a hidden kind of expression that it was suggesting why in a democratic country, why there's a law, minister of law. Because basically from the school we learned, in school we learned that Singapore government work in three, actually there's three different entities, which is the parliament, which is the legislatures, and the judiciary, and basically, and the last one is the executive. So I was thinking a bit further, actually, was it suggesting that, is there a conflict between Minister of Law and the judiciary kind of relationship? Do they work in the symbiotic way of symbiotic way of relationship, or are they different entities which are independent? Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. So, Minister, I would urge you to feel free to answer that question as both Minister of Law and Foreign Affairs Minister, since it pertains to China. Over to you.
Now, let me take that question first. Why do we have a law minister? We inherited some of these traditions, obviously, from Britain. If you look at many countries in the world, they call them justice ministers, justice secretaries, law ministers. But there are three great branches of the state. You have the executive, cabinet, and so on. You have the judiciary, completely independent. And you have parliament, which is sovereign, passes laws. So for the executive branch, I work very closely with the other ministers in relation to legislation, constitutionality. For example, all legislation comes through my ministry for a check on to make sure that it's constitutional. So, my people will sit there, we look at it, and my ministry is also responsible for various areas of the law, for making amendments, sometimes with others, sometimes on our own, penal code, criminal procedure code, quite a lot of the public law areas. If you need to make amendments, it's often made out of Ministry of Law, in consultation with the Home Affairs Ministry, in consultation with others. Constitutional amendments are taken up through Law Ministry. The Attorney General in Singapore performs two different functions. One, he advises and is a chief law advisor to the government. So often when we have legal issues, I don't give legal advice. He gives legal advice to the cabinet. Separately, he is also independent when it comes to questions of prosecutorial discretion. When to charge, when not to charge, he decides it. Under the Constitution, he is independent. Some countries have combined those roles. For example, UK, the Attorney General often is effectively in cabinet, is a member of the cabinet. In Australia, the Attorney General is a member of the cabinet. We have felt that keeping the two separate is better, because when you have the Attorney General in cabinet, then inevitably there is a politicization of the role. So this way, it's split. The politician is in the cabinet, the Attorney General is outside. He is a pure professional. We can do away with law minister, I guess. Many countries feel the need. Obviously, I have no role in terms of judgments, judiciary, except that, if something goes, say there is a question in Parliament on what happened in the subordinate courts or what happened in the High Court, they can't come to Parliament and answer. I will answer based on what they tell me. And people will understand there is a limit to how much I can be responsible for that. So that's the answer to the question on why there is a law minister here. It's not unique, and different countries impose different additional obligations on law ministers. For example, in Japan, Korea, and so on, the justice/law minister is also responsible for intelligence and a whole lot of other security matters. In Singapore, curiously, the law minister is in charge of all state land. So when I first became law minister, I wondered why. Why are they making me in charge of all land that belongs to government? Then I found out it's actually Mr. Barker's idea, and there's a good reason. The ministry that uses land most of all is national development. So it will make sense logically to put all land under Ministry of National Development. Put under there, let them decide. Public housing, most land. But the reason why Mr. Barker said it shouldn't be under Ministry of National Development is because they are the users of land, and how do you know that they will make the best use? So you should actually put land under some other ministry and ask the National Development Ministry or any other ministry to go and justify why some land has to be acquired from the public, why this particular state land has to be used for this purpose, and then I'm independent to that extent, verify and look at it and decide. So I sign off on land acquisitions, on issues like land use policies, topping up leases and so on. So a whole lot of things. Intellectual property, various other departments. Going back to the second question, I think those are really related. Shadow cabinet and whether PAP will ever give or allow a shadow cabinet to form. I don't think that's really in the hands of the PAP. The matter is for the people. We go for elections, it's for the people to decide. You have seen many different forms of government throughout the world, and it depends on the people, the level to which the PAP should be represented in Parliament, and the level to which one opposition party or a group of opposition parties should be represented in Parliament. So I think I can't answer that question. It depends on who the people believe can best serve the country and to what extent they need opposition, the strength in numbers, to act as a check on a PAP government or a non-PAP government. And that's the best answer I can give. As regards the first question, rather comprehensive question, let me try and recall the sort of contours of it. I think you asked, the phrase that struck in my mind is economic growth at all costs. Can we relax? Can we have quality of life? Is there a balance? Are we just pushing faster and faster and faster? Not to flatter you, but in some ways I think that touches the essence of the dilemmas, policy issues, the kind of things that keep most ministers up at night, because we work in a very globalized environment. And one of the reasons why we have succeeded is that we both have to deal with today's problems, but Singapore has always also looked at 20 years ahead, 30 years ahead. So if we were only concerned with today's problems, by and large, the people in the front row would be happy. But if we look at 20 years, 30 years, then that really looks after most of the people sitting behind. Their prime working ages, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. So what would Singapore be like in 10 years? What would Singapore be like in 20 years? What would Singapore be like in 30 years? What do we do? What do we have to do now to make sure that we succeed in 20 years? Most countries, by and large, don't think in those terms. But to put that in perspective, I travel around to various places talking about these issues. So I have a sort of set of slides that deal with some aspects. So I'll touch on them. Give me about 10, 15 minutes, and then we can talk about that. Because you really touch on the challenges, the opportunities, what do we need to do as a government, what do we need to do as a country, as a people. That's really it, and what are the trade-offs. So let's look at it. See, I've asked them to put up some slides. The starting point in all of this has got to be our current financial position, because you operate within a certain financial framework. So let's look at that, if it works. This is our budget. Just look at financial year 2013. Okay? We have an operating revenue of 55 billion, expenditures of 60 billion. Pause there. Today, we spend more than what we earn. Okay? In simple terms, that's called a structural deficit. Any family that earns less than what it spends will soon get into trouble. Likewise for countries. Not a lot of people are aware of this, even though the state budgets are presented year after year. But our actual expenditure today is more than what we collect in taxes, COE, whatever. So whenever in Parliament, whether it's PAP MPs or opposition MPs, the usual stand is, can we spend more on this? Can we spend more on that? Can we spend more on this? I sit back and I say, it's very easy to spend other people's money. You just impose more taxes and you spend. And it's very easy to be popular by spending money. But the problems will then be passed on to those people sitting behind, not the current generation. It's very simple. But why are we not in an actual deficit? Because we have, over the years, squirreled away enough money, reserves. We get net investment returns, which is 7 billion. So overall, we don't run into a deficit. But that's only because we are taking money, part of the income stream, from the reserves. So remember that. The fiscal position is not as sort of allows us to be completely unmindful of our expenditure in the way that some people discuss policy. So starting point. If you look at it today, 31% of Singaporeans pay income tax. 69% don't. What does that really mean? The education people get, the social security system, the housing, all of it, and the secure environment, defense, everything gets paid for out of the taxes of less than a third of the population. 2/3 of the population, or more, nearly 70%, are able to enjoy the benefits of the country without having to pay income tax. That's our approach. Try and let people keep as much of the money they earn, and the corollary of that is, of course, if you want something, a specific service, by and large, you pay for that. There are only two ways of doing this. I tax more, and I then decide what you spend by providing services, or I leave the money with you, you decide what you want to spend it on. Of course, there will be a group at the bottom who need a lot of support. I'll skip this. This is just a different tax rates in the various places. I haven't put it up here, but again, a number that is often missed is that if you take a family of 4, lower income, it's presented in Parliament, the amount of transfers that take place from the state to the individual, if you take the housing subsidy, you take all the other subsidies, it's in the region of $500,000 to $600,000 to a lower income family from the state, out of public coffers. So in that context, let's look at, and to me, there isn't enough debate on what the challenges we face. There's a lot of debate on sort of day-to-day issues, which are important, which are, if there are difficulties, people have to deal with them, and the government has to try and help them. So it's obvious that they come up, they have to be dealt with, government has to deal with them. At the same time, I think we need much more debate at this stage of our development on the next 20, 30 years, and what the real challenges are that face us. And there's hardly been any debate. Why do I say it? Let's look at our internal challenges. The first is this. You look at our current population profile, look at where the bulge is. 40, 45, 50, 55. What does that mean? That's the front row, myself, a few people, smattering of people behind. What are the implications? We now have growing life expectancy. So, and you look at what's at the bottom, what the pyramid looks like. Implications are fairly obvious. These are the implications. In 1970s, we had 13.5 persons working to support one retired person. This year, below 6 working to support one retired person. 2030, that's just 17 years away. You have 2 persons working to support one retired person. 17 years, if the people here are undergrads, 24, 23 years old, 40 years old. When they are 40, prime working age comes down to 2 persons working to support one retired person. What does that mean? You think the taxes can remain the same? Now, all things being equal as of today, what do you think there is for means for state expenditure and revenue? How is the state going to get more revenue? Second, are all things going to remain equal? Do you believe that? As the population ages and a substantial number of people are retired and in their 60s and 70s and 80s, healthcare expenditure is going to shoot up. So all things are not going to be equal. You're going to have a fast rising expenditure and a declining working population sitting in a small island of 720 square kilometers. How often have we talked about these things? These are the challenges that we face, and these are not propaganda, these are hard facts. I mean, the ratio 2.1 can change if we make people work a bit longer and so on, but this is the reality. So again, when I see on, I know there is always something else on which money can be spent. But every time government agrees and puts down a program, you must remember it's hard-coded, it can never, very difficult to take it back. So whenever we put down a program today to spend money, I think the biggest risk for Singapore is a populist government that decides that the way to succeed is to spend more and more money. Every program that you put down money today would just mushroom in 10, 15 years. So the impact will not be seen in the next 5 years. The next 10 years will be okay. But after that, how are you going to afford it? How sustainable is it going to be? What are your tax rates going to be? Today, our top tax rate is 20%. Hong Kong is at 17%. The bright young people who are mobile, maybe I can go up to 25%. People might be prepared to pay. If I made it 35%, double Hong Kong, some people will stay. But some people may say, I'd rather go to a place where I pay less. So there are limits to how much our taxes can go up. We are facing a certain increase, a substantial increase in expenditure, and a decrease in working population. Those are the frameworks that keep people like me up at night. What are the implications of a declining population to our defense in terms of manpower? Taxes, I told you about Hong Kong tax rates, medical costs, social support, Social support meaning even the older people who don't need to go to the hospital. I set up a senior citizens corner center in my active aging center in my constituency a few months ago, because 25% of my constituency is already past the senior citizens age. So in many ways, I am reflective of what Singapore will be like in 10 years, 15 years. I need to set up centers. They come down, they are happy, but it takes a lot of support in terms of people coming in, nurses from hospital, from the community coming in to support them, because otherwise they'll be alone in their flats. So we need to start thinking in terms of where are we going to get our healthcare workers from in a declining population? What kind of social support systems are we going to create for our fast aging population? By international definitions, by 2015 or 16, we will be an aged society. Some people say it's because of the stress in Singapore that the TFR is low. Look at this. I call it an East Asian issue. The real reason is city living, you educate everybody, people have choices. You don't need marriage. Marriage is no longer an economic choice in the sense that you don't need to marry in order to have a better economic life. Our women are independent, our men are independent, so it becomes a lifestyle choice. So marriage has become a lifestyle choice rather than an economic choice. And once it becomes a lifestyle choice, a lot of people do choose to remain unmarried. I say this as a joke, but it is true. Some surveys indicate that if you are a married man, you live longer. But for women, if you are unmarried, you live longer. So if you look at the next slide, you look at on the left-hand column, look at 30 to 34, 44% of our men are unmarried now, compared with 33% 10 years ago. And fully 31% of our women in that age group are unmarried. Now, the figures on top are not reflective because that's of a different generation. You've got to look at this generation and then ask yourself, how many of them are going to remain unmarried? Actually, our TFR among married women is 2, replacing ourselves. But our total TFR comes down to 1 because quite a significant part of the population choose to remain unmarried. These are all fundamental trends in social living. And this is nothing that I think government can do much about. We can't go and say, well, we can encourage, we can provide finances and so on, but if people don't want to get married, that's their choice. This is, of course, one other way out, which many countries seem to have gone. As to whether we are ready for it, whether we'll go down this road. I think social changes are taking place fairly quickly, but I just showed this to you for a laugh. I mean, more than a laugh, actually. It's but what does all this mean? And this is a slide that I put down because it concerns me a lot. You look at it, whatever we are going to face, Japan faces today. And what's happening in Japan? Let's read this on top. Simply put, older people aware of their relatively short remaining lifespan want to restore what they lost as soon as possible. Meanwhile, young families want to revitalize communities with more people, jobs, and social freedoms. Elderly population, richer, more risk-averse, and more powerful than the young, is also more resistant to change. And you see here in highlighted, officials acknowledge that the elderly have a lot of voting power in Japan, hard to boss about. Project again 2030. With our life expectancy, with people living till 80, 80 plus, the voting power will be with the retired. The young people who are producing the income will be the ones who want to build for the future. The old people will say, spend it now. Spend on my healthcare, spend on this, spend on that. I want it spent now. And in a democracy, the policies will have to follow the voting power. So, we had an enormous dividend, and we were lucky in the 70s and 80s, really because we had a huge working population and a very small retired population. It's going to change very quickly, and the moment it changes, our whole economic dynamics will change. Today in Japan, they are selling more nappies for old people compared with nappies for children. And Financial Times a few months ago had an article, amusing, because they showed an old man a few months ago, maybe last year, an old man who is a porn actor, and this porn films are made for old people. So there's a new industry now. And they did a feature on him. But people in Singapore haven't appreciated. 17 years is round the corner, We haven't appreciated what all this means. But if you want to appreciate what all this means, just look at Japan, but at the same time ask, are we technologically as advanced as Japan? Are we a homogeneous society with the kind of deep skills and stability that Japan has? Or, 90 million population reducing to 70 million is different from 3.2 million citizens reducing. And of course, in the recent past, given our tightening of foreign labor, if you go across outside there, you ask the employers, the constant refrain you get is, it's too difficult to do business here, you're making it very difficult, very tough, we want to leave. MNCs, SMEs, everyone. Just a quick slide to tell you the kind of healthcare workers that we are going to need. Roughly, you need about 32,000 staff. In that increase of 70% from today, just on this. Where are you going to get them from? And then external challenges. These are internal challenges. There are many others. I just showed you a couple. External challenges, just look at these figures. We are an air hub, we get about 45,000 jobs. Sea hub, we get 150,000 jobs. Finance, 166,000. Energy, 50,000. Just broad numbers. Look at Bangkok, look at Singapore. Which do you think is a natural air hub? Obvious, isn't it? In 2006, Thaksin Shinawatra, then the Prime Minister, built this huge airport. Some airlines moved from Singapore. It's very easy. Land is much cheaper. Operating costs are much less expensive. It's more central. But unfortunately for Thailand, there was a coup, political instability. The new government didn't see the airport as a major project, and we survived. But these things can go. There's nothing written in stone about us being an air hub. 45,000 jobs. Next, sea, 150,000 jobs, right? China is now building a port in Kiap Phu in Myanmar. They are building another one, last week you would have seen, in Gwadar. They are building a railroad straight into Kunming and from Gwadar into China. The idea is to avoid Straits of Malacca. If you are a strategist, military strategist, you don't want your lifeline to go through the Straits of Malacca where a few submarines can stop your ships. That's the main reason. But economically, if Chinese shipping in a substantial number is diverted, and when China says it's going to do it, it will be done. This is going to be done within a few years. What does that mean for our 150,000 jobs? How serious is this? How much mind space does it get amongst our citizens? How much do you read about this? Jurong Island is our petrochemical hub. Malaysia has announced and is proceeding, as they are entitled to, a much larger hub here in Pengerang, which is going to do exactly what Jurong Island is going to do. Their land costs a few Malaysian cents per square feet. Ours is reclaimed land and therefore costs several tens of dollars. Our labor is, of course, far more expensive. $2,000 here, you can get someone for 1,000 ringgit in Malaysia, or 1,300 ringgit, maybe 2,000 ringgit. I don't need to belabor the point, but basically it's much cheaper, and whatever we can do, they can do. Malaysia announces new financial center, and they want to put in more than $1 billion. So sit back. I say to my audiences, there are only three ways in which a country makes money. One, you dig something from the ground and sell. One, you grow something on the ground and you sell. The third, you are the middleman. Somebody else digs it from the ground and you sell it for them. You provide legal, accounting, financial services. We are the middleman in this region. But you know enough of the history to know how much our neighbors want us to make money off them. I mean, if you were there, you would say, why am I not making this money myself? And that's what's happening. Rightly so, because they are entitled to. So don't mistake. A lot of reasons why we have succeeded is because we have always thought ahead. We have put in place systems, but don't assume that others cannot do that and others cannot compete with you. So just one other example before I move on. You take accounting, you take law. You come in, Business Times yesterday said lawyers start on $7,000. But there's, in Bangalore, sit firms with 500 lawyers, 400 lawyers. Today I go to a law firm in Singapore, I want to reduce my costs. What is there to prevent me from saying, I want the opinion to be done out of Bangalore? You just supervise it. Online. Radiology, actual examples. You take the X-ray in Singapore. In Singapore, a radiologist is an MBBS and then a specialist, I think. You pay, six-figure salaries. You take the X-ray today, email it to India or China. The guy comes back with an analysis, assessment on what's wrong with your bones. You're not going to pay him what you pay in Singapore. So just ask yourself, the young people here, what do you think you can do which cannot be done faster, better, cheaper somewhere else? At the same time, opportunities. This is our situation today. In population size, that is our bubble. In economic size, that's our bubble, the third largest economy. We are working on a project because we always think of the future. Integrate ASEAN 2015, 600 million people, $2.2 trillion economy, bigger than India's economy. You combine with Australia, you're talking about almost $4 trillion. We can be the New York of ASEAN country if we get things right, if we get our systems right. Provided our neighbors and the whole of ASEAN allows our services to be transferable. So we got to work on that. And we're working very hard on that. We have removed about 70-75% of the tariffs, but another 25% will be the most difficult. But if we can get that through, then we break out of this prison of size and look at the entire ASEAN. Now, the challenges we face, however, are not insuperable. We have faced far more challenges in the past. The key is thinking about them, getting good people in, thinking 15, 20 years, working out the solutions, and educating our people to the best of their abilities. We can face all the challenges. But if we start saying, can we slow down? Of course we can slow down. It's not a problem. But you've got to ask whether the Chinese are going to slow down. You got to ask whether the Indians are going to slow down. You're going to ask whether the Malaysians are going to slow down and preferably be slower than you. Now, if you think you can organize all of that, you can afford to slow down. Alternatively, you must be prepared for another trade-off. If you don't want them to slow down and you want to let them overtake you, you no longer need to be an A hub or C hub, whatever. It's possible. But you then need to agree that quality of life could be different. You have to agree that unemployment may have to go up because we are a service sector and our success depends on being able to do something better than other people. And then you've got to say unemployment, then others who have employment must support them, which means taxes must go up. You've got to work through, it's not, many people when they ask this question, Vishwa, assume that all other things will remain the same. I will have this lifestyle, I'll have this job, I'll have this quality of life, and I can afford to slow down. If the answer to that is yes, of course, then you should slow down. But the real answer is your lifestyle and quality of life and the state of society would be different. Now, as long as we debate that and agree that that's an outcome that we are prepared to accept, yes, the answer is we can afford to slow down. I would give a more nuanced answer, which is my own answer, which is I don't think you should continue to get growth simply by inputting foreign labor. I think we are still having more foreign labor because construction industry, we need to produce the flats, roads, we want to double our MRT system within 10 years. Healthcare, you saw that. If I don't get foreign labor, there's no way I'm going to get healthcare workers, so we need that. And we need to house them somewhere. We need to accept that. At the same time, in our SMEs and industries and so on, we need to try and push productivity up such that our quality of life can be maintained while reducing reliance on foreign labor. Not easy, extremely difficult. We are trying, causing a lot of pain to SMEs, but at the same time, that's what the population wants. So we try. But it's not an easy process. So I can tell you what the opportunities are. I can tell you whether we can afford to slow down. The answer is you can afford to do anything you like, as long as you know what the trade-offs are. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. That was a very long 15 minutes. Please, have a seat.
That was a very long first question.
Okay. Some of the points that you've raised are really, even though we may be aware of it, I think the way you presented it brings it to sharp relief. But having said that, when you talk about quality of life, you present it as something that is an absolute. I would like to suggest that it is actually notional.
No, I don't say it's absolute.
I haven't finished my question.
Yeah.
So it's not an absolute. It is something that can change over time, perhaps by adjusting expectations, perhaps by forcing people to adjust how much we need to be happy. But that requires a political culture that is able to persuade people that this is a trade-off that we must be prepared to settle for. Some would argue that the direction we are taking, the path we are taking, could be politically expedient. I would like your comment on that, please.
I think it's a political expediency. If that had been the reason for our policies would have looked very different. It's always been focused on a simple calculus, which is people want the best for themselves. They have a certain energy, they have a certain ability. Everyone must be given the opportunity to go as far as they want and do what they want. If they want to be the best doctor, we must provide the framework to be the best doctor. If they want to be the best artist, we want to provide the framework. If they are happy with something else, quite satisfied, the framework must allow that. Free, open framework. The government's job is to give access to high quality education, safety, security, and in Singapore, roof over your head, medical for those who can't afford it, a pension system that is self-funded, supported by the state in some ways for those who can't afford it. Sort of framework where you go out there, be whatever you want. At the same time, it is a duty of the government to make sure that not everyone can get all the full benefits of a free market system. You need to make sure that people can get jobs. There's nothing more soul destroying than being unemployed for many people. And in a place like this, I always compare Singapore to a top that has got a spin. If you don't have jobs, you can't survive on your own. You will look to the society. If the entire economy is not doing well, and I don't put this in black and white terms, I'm just giving you a broad framework. If the entire economy is not doing well, let's say instead of unemployment at 3%, our unemployment is at 15% or 10%. People often talk about Finland as a model. Youth unemployment is at 24%. 1 in 4 of the undergrads will not get a job outside when they come out. And you stay without a job, you don't upgrade your skills. Has the state done its best for you? If there are no employment prospects, and Singapore doesn't have a hinterland. It's not as if you can go to the countryside and do other things. You are stuck in a city. If the government doesn't provide you with opportunities, what are you going to do? So we see it as a moral duty, a serious obligation for us to create a system where people can get jobs. But how is that political expediency?
But Minister, in Finland, one could argue that their unemployment rate among especially younger generation could be very high. But does it necessarily mean that they are a lot less happy?
Well,
do you always need full employment for the society to have a certain measure of happiness? I know I may sound like like an idealist, but I'm just forcing the issue to ask whether have we really looked at all options? Or are we trying constantly to defend the position that we have adopted because of a cognitive bias?
Well, maybe I can have a show of hands. How many of you think you will be happy if you don't have employment?
Maybe I could rephrase the question. How many of you think you'd be unhappy if you don't have a job? Okay, it's kind of even.
Hello.
It's the way you asked the question.
There were no hands up for the first question.
No, precisely. It's because of the way you phrased it.
No, it was a fair question. How many of you would be happy or can be happy if you don't have a job? But I have a rider to that. You see, it's not just you can be happy if you don't have a job, if the state or the society is in a position to support you, as some countries have tried to do. But supposing the state or society is not in a position to support you because the inherent nature of our society, how do you think it can survive? But you see, I also think slightly differently. Bhutan, go look at The Economist, recent articles on the level of happiness. And Bhutan is supposed to be at the top. I see the government's job as providing a framework, providing education, providing all the basic things that are necessary for the human being, for the person to become a much better person, to do the best he or she wishes with his life.
And for his family.
And for his family, for society, hopefully, for the community at large, and for the world community. It depends on the person, on the individual. But, if you were a Buddhist or a Hindu, or many of the other religions, you could say, I really don't need any of these things, any of the material benefits. Happiness is a state of mind. It is indeed a state of mind. But do you think, as a minister, I can go out there and tell someone who doesn't have a job or doesn't have a house or doesn't have some things that he wants and tell him or her, you know, it's a state of mind. You really ought not to be unhappy. Shall we have redefined the paradigm and say to you, why don't you just try and be happy with whatever little you have? Now, it has got to come from inside. I'm one of those who believes that happiness comes from inside.
Yeah.
The moment you say, I need this, I need that, I need that, you get that car, you think you're going to be happy, somebody has got a bigger car. You want this particular type of house, somebody has got a bigger house. So you will never be happy as long as you look for positional goods. But as a government, I cannot impose my personal values. I cannot say to people, oh, you shouldn't be striving for this, you shouldn't be striving for that. My role is to provide a framework where everyone strives to the extent of their wishes, and there will be many people who will say, like you, I don't need to. I'm quite happy taking a different path. I've had lawyers in my firm after 2 years who's come to me and say, I want to do something else. I understand it entirely. But what does the government do? We can only provide a framework. I can't tell people, don't do this or do that. And at the same time, we have to make sure that we instill, of course, the right value systems. But in terms, if the entire society and the economy of the country comes down, and as a result, we can't defend ourselves, we can't provide for people, then I think we would have failed. But it's not so stark. Is it possible to have a balance? I think in the context of the international competition, you need to be very clear what that balance means. What that balance means is that you may very quickly become uncompetitive, and you've got to work out the consequences. And if as a society, the majority want that, then of course, that's the way we have to go.
But do you feel that this current situation is actually an opportunity to force us as a society to pause, take stock, and ask ourselves whether we need to reorientate our priorities as a society, not government, as a society?
Yeah.
Because the pace at which we are moving may, for argument's sake, not be sustainable. And we all need that pause in our lives, right, as in society, to say, maybe not, maybe this is not.
What do you think the government should do to pause?
Right.
And I'm not quite clear. I think people should take a pause to look at their lives and ask themselves where they want to go, which direction, what do they want to do with their lives, how do they make themselves happy. I entirely believe that.
Agreed.
But I'm not quite sure what the
government can.
Yeah. So what do you think the government ought to do?
Maybe the government should step back.
From what?
No, because if we constantly send the message that we
No,
need...
wait, let's be clear.
No.
The government provides security. It cannot
Sure.
step back from that. Government provides education. It shouldn't step back from that. Government creates economic opportunities. I don't think it should step back from that.
Yes.
Government provides the sort of international framework where we do treaties, enter into free trade agreements to create frameworks for our people. We shouldn't step back from that. So I'm not quite sure what you mean by government steps back.
No, Minister,
from what?
I guess what I'm trying to say is it's about messaging. Where the message that you hear quite often from the government is, if we do not move in this direction at this pace, these are the consequences we're going to face. It actually forces people to shift to a cognitive bias that says that this is the only way forward. So that's what I meant, Minister. I mean, with due respect,
two answers,
to step back.
understand.
Yeah.
So, you see, as a government, we must tell the truth. Like, what I said today. I present this, and then the people can decide for themselves, okay, these are the challenges, these are the opportunities, these are the trade-offs. I go in this direction, or I go in that direction. The other thing, our Singapore conversation, we've met thousands and thousands of people. I wasn't a direct part of it, but many ministers, other office holders have met with them. What comes through consistently is quite different from what you have said. What you have said comes through from an elite class like yourself. Yeah. But on the whole, when you meet people who are looking at the next month, the next year, their opportunities, particularly the younger people, they are very focused on what is going to happen to my life. That is the overwhelming majority. And if you are elected on that platform, what you can do is be honest with people. Don't, lie to them. Don't say everything is going to be all right. You have to say, these are the choices, these are the trade-offs, and it is not for me to decide. We have to decide it together, in the sense that you decide, I do my best to go in that direction. And if the trade-off that our people make after knowledge of the full set of trade-offs, because so far whatever I've read, usually strikes me as proceeding on a certain assumption that all other things will be the same, and we can, sort of smell the roses. I read something before the last elections about why can't we smell the roses and walk the streets and look at the greenery. I said to myself, pretty much like I said to you, what stops you? What stops you from doing it? But just don't ask to get the same sort of lifestyle that somebody else who doesn't do all that has. So you have to make the choices. And I agree with you, maybe the government's messaging can be clearer in this. It can come out as, look, we have different pathways. Which pathway we choose, what are the consequences? And we've got to be honest about that. I shouldn't be understood today as saying, if we chose, say, a slightly different path, it'll be disastrous. No, that's not my point. My point is, the world is competitive. We have to decide where we want to place ourselves, and we have to be clear what the economic and social consequences of that are. That's what the majority want.
Yeah.
That's what the government
I
will
appreciate
do.
the clarification you made. And my final question before I throw it open to the floor is, on the one hand, I suggested just now that it may help if the government steps back from its messaging. On the other hand, it may also be useful for the government to step forward with messaging that suggests that, people exemplary, people who actually earn less can find happiness without a drop in quality of life. I mean, for example, you made a decision in your career, and that choice to become a cabinet minister meant that you had to suffer a significant cut in your salary. It is a choice that you made, and I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you regret that decision, unless I'm wrong. But those kind of messages, now I'm very serious, those messages coming from people whom you respect, whom society holds in high esteem, actually shifts values. I know of people, I know of individuals from RI, for example, since you're a former Refletion, that has had an impact on younger Refletians who say, if he can do that, then maybe it's not that bad an option. Money may not have to remain the central consideration in my life. That's what I'm referring to. What's your comment?
Well, I generally don't answer questions by reference to myself. But, I'll put it this way. I did say that I believe that happiness has to come from inside. If happiness depends on money, or it depends on material benefits or positional goods, I think it's going to be difficult. Yeah. But at the same time, these material comforts and benefits and positional goods make life more comfortable. And therefore, I really don't want to make a value judgment on those sorts of things. I can speak for myself, I can't speak for the rest of society. I do think that in our education system, particularly the primary and secondary school education system, we can emphasize more on society and values, and not have a system that in the end, if you look at many education systems, Korea, China, Taiwan, elsewhere as well, if it becomes a situation where everyone is for himself, I think in the longer term, it damages society, it weakens society, and a degree of entitlement mentality grows because I achieved all of this on my own and therefore I'm entitled to all of this. So I certainly think, Sukyat has mentioned this a number of times, in our education system we can build a greater sense of the community. And in many ways I think that will help as we face these challenges, because we are going to need it a lot more in the next 20, 30 years. We are going to have to look after each other. We are going to have to look after far more older people. Younger people are going to have to spend a lot more time looking after their parents and others in the community. So we are going to need to develop that sense of community. And that I think, has got to come from the home primarily, but the education system can help. In the larger context, what can the government do in society in that context? There are conflicting messages. On the one hand, there are some difficulties in that, because on the one hand, if you want to create economic vibrancy, you want to make sure that when your young people come out, they have jobs. And people expect in Singapore to move up. I'll tell you a story about expectations in a minute. Then it can only be done if business in Singapore is competitive vis-a-vis today, not just the region but the world. How are you competitive vis-a-vis Shanghai, Bangalore, and now the US? Because energy costs have gone down substantially. Gas shipped to Singapore is at $18. The same amount of gas in the US is $3. Look at the differential in energy cost. So these are real issues. So you have to compete. And at the same time, you have to make sure that people have that communitarian spirit. It's a challenge. We have to deal with that challenge. And we have to deal with that within very tight parameters. I'm not going to say it's easy, but I think we can do more in our education system. And myself, you asked me, not the best example, because, in your late 40s, you move into, you take a financial sacrifice, but a lot of people will say, but you have had several good years outside. And from a personal perspective, then if you have reached a certain stage of comfort, you give it up. I would say someone who chooses to give it up in their 30s, early 30s, gives up more. And one of the things I worry about is our system has always succeeded because we treat politics like we treat any other apprenticeship. Young people are brought into politics, into government, in their 30s. They are made junior ministers. They serve pretty much an apprenticeship for years and years and years, and they imbibe the values and the long-term thinking. And then, by the time they are in their 40s, they become full ministers, and they are in for about 10, 15 years. And there is the depth of experience and a future where they then put those policies in place. If we shift that, if our politics resembles that of other countries, then our governance will also resemble that of other countries. And that's my belief.
I appreciate your comment, and I guess the point is that I don't think we're at cross purposes. My response or my question actually came about as a result of looking at the challenges. They're a tall order. They're not going to go away. No matter how much of effort is put in by the government and the people, they're not going to go away. In fact, in some of those areas, it's going to get worse, regardless of how much of effort you put in. So the one thing that we can continue to look at, besides self-help among people, is also in the longer term about managing our own expectations about what can and should continue to bring us happiness. But I appreciate your comment that maybe we can send some of those messages at an earlier age. With that, maybe we can get some questions and comments from the floor, but please can we avoid speeches?
Hi, my name is Alvin, and the question is,
Alvin from?
I'm a staff at NUS, adjunct staff.
You're a staff, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have this question from a friend, and it says that the rule of law should be such that the law is applied in every situation, and it's not up to anyone to decide in which instance the law is applied and in which instance the law isn't. This is equality before the law. So why does the AGC have jurisdiction to choose when to persecute and when not to persecute? That brings the law into disrepute. MDA, sedition law, 377A, all fall in that category. If a law needs to be more specific, then perhaps it needs to be amended, and if it needs to be struck down, then it should be, because ambiguity allows the law to be abused. That's the question. Thank you.
Okay.
Very long question, okay.
I
Yes.
understand. Basically, you're looking at why does the AGC have discretion to decide when to charge and when not to charge. I'll tell you why. There are, again, it's a choice we can all make, yeah? And maybe we do a show of hands at the end of it. I'll give you two different options. You see, one option is to say AGC has no discretion. As long as an offense is committed, you must be charged. The other is to say the Attorney General, in his role as public prosecutor, can look at the facts of the case, and even if you have committed an offense, he can choose to exercise his discretion not to charge you, or maybe charge you the lesser offense. Let me, these questions are best answered by concrete examples. Many years ago, I read of this. I've come across many of these cases. I'll give you some examples, but one obvious example, which is not personal, chap went to Harrods, came down from Scotland. He hadn't eaten for 3 days or something. He was hungry. Went in there, saw a sandwich, took it, ate. Theft, because he had no intention of paying. Do you think he should be charged? Because if he is charged, he'll be found guilty, he will have a conviction, he will have a record. Or do you think the Attorney General should have the discretion to say this fellow is not a real thief and compare him with somebody else dressed very nicely, goes in there, steals for the sake of stealing? Are there differences between those two cases? Both have committed a theft because both intended to steal. One did it because he could no longer stand his hunger and was desperately poor. The other did it to make some money and didn't need it. The whole role of prosecutorial discretion is to distinguish between these cases, because if they are charged, the judge has to find both guilty. I give you another example, this from a case I dealt with. The young man and his parents came to see me when I was in practice. Actually, as an MP, they came to see me. Very poor family. They were extremely proud of this boy. He had, done well at A levels, got admitted to one of our universities. I won't say which one. Between the time he got his results and got admitted and actual enrollment, he did something stupid. Okay, it's clear offense. There is no doubting it. And the way the laws were, he will have to go to jail. Not only will he have to go to jail, he will then have to lose a scholarship that he has obtained. He's got to, I cannot remember, but I think he might have lost his place. So a conviction record for the rest of his life, loss of a scholarship, possibly, I think, a loss of his position in university as well. You look at it, I looked at it, I can tell you I was satisfied. He's not a criminal, but people do stupid things sometimes. Should he be charged? Or is it better that the Attorney General looks at him, calls him in, gives him a stern warning, and says, young man, don't ever do this again? And that way the Attorney General doesn't prevent him, doesn't destroy, and doesn't send to jail a person with a bright future. Are there circumstances in which discretion ought to be exercised? Does every case fall into the same template? You see, the real reason you're asking this question is this. There are two ways of going about this. One is to trust an institution, give them discretion, and hope that they exercise it properly. The other is not to trust them and believe that, therefore, there should be absolute equality in treatment and set out your law so strictly that there is no discretion and it takes a certain track. So every case will get charged, regardless of who he is, the circumstances of the offense, everyone will be found guilty. Those are the two options. You have the second option. The UK, they also have discretion for the Attorney General. But because of arguments like this, they then went one step further and they said the Attorney General has discretion, but he has got to publish the guidelines under which he will exercise his discretion. So you know what happens? People then say, okay, if I committed the offense in this way, then the Attorney General will have to exercise his discretion in my favor. And then if I'm not forgetting this, if I remember it correctly, I think in one case, the person who intended to commit an offense actually wrote to say, I intend to do this. Am I right, Simon? Yes. And can you please tell me whether you will exercise your discretion in my favor? And the Attorney General said no. And they went to court, and I think the court ruled that the AG has got to say.
So it's about gaming the system.
So you see, best intentions are always there, but one has got to be practical in society. The real answer is choose people who are good, put them there, but make sure that your society is educated well enough to know what is happening. If the AG exercises its discretion badly, often enough, it will be obvious.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I didn't ask a show of hands, but I think a lot of people will say there should be discretion. You wouldn't want to send a man who had to eat to jail.
You can ask for a show of hands if you want. It's okay.
May I follow up if...
All right.
He wants to follow up.
No, there are plenty of questions. Maybe if there's more time later.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This question comes online. Minister, will the ASEAN Economic Community 2015 increase competition with the region? How should Singaporeans prepare to tackle the opportunity available? Can we expect? The reason why I put this question is there have been plenty of questions. There are altogether 19 people have asked this question online.
You see, this is something, I said many things keep me up at night, but this is something I'm very excited about, ASEAN 2015. We are not going to, as I've said in public, on the 1st of January 2015 or 31st December 2015, declare victory and say we are one economic community. Not possible. Work in progress, 75% of the tariffs have come down. We are working hard. But if we succeed, from Kunming in the north, right down to Indonesia, Brunei, Singapore, one economic community, but we have three pillars: political, security, socio-economic, cultural. Three networked with ports, seaports, roads, highways built across, tariffs down, then I think such a large economic area is going to need a superb service center. A superb service center with rule of law, where you know you can walk the streets without being assaulted, where you know the judges are not going to go after you just because they've taken money, where you know the police are not corrupt, where you know the system works, where you know you can put your money in and it'll be safe. That place can be the service center for a $2.2 trillion economy growing at 5 to 7%. Huge opportunities. So does it increase competition? Yes. But do we have the best education system in the region? Answer yes. Do we have people who can, I believe, I have a lot of faith in our young people. I cannot tell you what industry is going to succeed in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. But if I've educated the people to the best of their abilities, they can face any challenge. My challenge is to create the environment.
So that actually leads comfortably to the next question I want to put up, which 17 similar questions. Can we put it up, please? Okay. So what's our comparative advantage? You see, because earlier on in your slides you talked about Malaysia, wanting to be another financial hub and so on. So what gives us the edge, the confidence with which you just gave the first answer?
I think a few things. One, our governance system is, I think, generally recognized as very good. I don't want to say the best and so on, but you look at any indicator in the world in terms of how clean the country is in terms of corruption, lack of it, rule of law, logistics, government's ability to think long-term and plan long-term, provide a framework for people to operate, for businesses to operate. I think we provide as good, if not better, framework than most of the region. Second, government alone can't do this. I think we have people of the highest quality. Our people are hardworking, they are highly educated, and as I said earlier, I'm very, very optimistic about our young people. They are idealistic, they are talented, they are, a huge number are well educated, they can tackle any challenge. Compared with the region, we are educating more of our people at a higher grade. Third, the reputation that Singapore has. I go to the United Nations. This is a 720 square kilometers piece of rock island. Why would anybody want to see the foreign minister of Singapore? But 32 countries on average, 35, 38, want to see me. Finland says they want to come here and learn how we tackle youth unemployment, happiness notwithstanding. So, so we have a tremendous amount of goodwill. So in the region you go, last month, the month before, I was in Oman. First day I did the groundbreaking completion ceremony for $1 billion project that our company is doing in Oman. Because they say Singapore, clean, produces on time, no corruption. Next day I went to another part, multi-billion-dollar project, Singapore company, main contractor, doing this. So our companies all over. Vietnam wants us. China, we are there. All over the world, we are creating economic opportunities because the brand name of Singapore is very strong. So people, people, people.
What's a quick piece of advice that you would give to students, graduating students, about how to rise above the din, so to speak, in the region?
Chase your dreams.
That we have heard before.
Be happy. And
now he's being sarcastic.
No. Honestly, I think if you're
that's a good thing, because
if you're not happy doing what you're doing, if you're not happy doing what you're doing, I don't think you're going to be very good at it. You've got to be happy. You've got to say, I'm doing this because I want to do it, rather than somebody else asked me to do it.
Yeah.
So you got to know what you want. You got to want it passionately, and you need to be trained enough. Thankfully, our universities are world class. Our people are good. So they have what it takes.
So they can be happy. Okay.
Well, that is a choice that they have to make.
Okay. Next few questions. How much time do we have? We are prepared to extend this, Minister. How much time do you have with us?
If I'm not with you, I'll be working. So.
Okay. The time now is it's almost 9. Ministers these days don't do much work, so I guess. So maybe about maximum 9:30. All right, maximum 9:30. Minister, are you okay with that? It's almost 9 now.
Okay.
Okay. Right, yes.
Hi, Minister. My name is Wang Jue. I'm a NUS alumni. So during your talk, you mentioned about increasing productivity as one of your solutions to Singapore's imposing problems. So can you share with us the implementations in details, how can this increase of productivity be achieved? Thank you.
It's a complex question. I'm not an economist. I can only tell you what I've understood from discussions. But first point I repeatedly am told by the finance minister is that it's not easy. It's extremely difficult. But having said that, it comes from training your people to the best of their abilities. So university, polytechnics, IT, whatever it is that you want to do, if you have received training, and for those who are already in the workforce, we provide both the training assistance and financial assistance for firms to send their people for upgrading. Second, I think it means going to other countries. If we use a lot of labor, for example, in construction, precasting, using some techniques. People go to Germany now from Singapore to study construction techniques. They use less manpower than we do, far less. How do they do it? What are the techniques, technologies? How do the engineers do it? Study. We bring it down. Our companies are much smaller than German companies. Then government has to come in and try and help. So I'm just giving you a couple of examples. But in many sectors, for example, say in the hospitality sector, in Hong Kong and some other countries, it's 0.5% per room. We were at 1% per room. We are now, I think, at about 0.6 or 0.7. So you look at ways in which you can cut down on manpower, do some things faster, with more equipment, with better training. I mean, those are the things I can tell you. It's quite a painful process for some companies. And if you have been reliant on foreign manpower, and I talk to a lot of SMEs, I have a lot of sympathy for them. It's not easy to say, move your workers out, try and do something else. Right? Answer is training, 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 upgrading, incentives for that. But not easy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
Good evening, sir. I'm Yuan Chen, a Year 2 Environmental Studies student in NUS. I have one comment, one question. The first is that I agree with you that the quality of life issue is a cultural issue, problem and not a government problem. But I think that one thing the government can do is to change the Manpower Act to reduce the maximum number of hours from 44 hours a week to 40 hours a week. The second question would be, I understand your concern about the healthcare in the future. Doesn't then it make sense to have a universal health insurance program where people are covered from birth? And because the government is a single buyer, it can lower the cost for everybody. Thanks.
On the first, it's not quite correct for me to say quality of life is an individual issue, because the choices government makes in terms of the larger framework can affect individuals' quality of life as well. Basically, bad policies means bad economics. Bad economics means bad economy for the country. Bad economy for the country can affect your quality of life as well. So, and the reverse is also true. But if what you are suggesting is improve people's quality of life, which you define as working a certain number of hours.
So that people do not overwork.
I understand. Yeah. So you want to prescribe by legislation the maximum number of hours people can work, wish to work. I see a number of problems with it. One is philosophical, because in any system, you should give people the choice of how long they want to work. I think rather than the government saying, I think you should not work more than X hours. I think there are many areas where government can intervene, like discrimination, like, if people want to sack women who are either expecting or have given birth. I think those are all areas where government can legitimately intervene. Should government intervene to say, well, all over Singapore, everyone, without any exception, should work only X number of hours, and I feel almost everything I've said hasn't made an impact on the question, because if I'm living in a cocoon, Singapore, and I have no need to worry about any kind of external competition, and I only answer to myself, and we can create a successful economy just within Singapore. We can even say 20 hours maybe.
No,
But let me finish.
okay.
But if I have to compete with China, I'm just using China as an example. And if you are a business person who is deciding where to invest your money, and if you come into Singapore, forget about maximum number of hours, but just say with a whole set of rules that put restrictions on you, and then you look at China and there are no such restrictions, and you know the cost advantages that China has, where would you put your dollar of investment? Singapore still has a premium because of the rule of law, the logistics, the systems, everything else I told you. But you always have to judge what is the value of that premium vis-a-vis your competitors. France, a far bigger economy than us, did try this. They did impose a maximum hour system. Do you think it's a success? What do you think is happening with the French economy?
No, I don't think it's a success because...
You think it's a success in France?
In a way, yes, because they have better quality of life. But in a way, if they are productive in that 7 hours a day, for example, and they can produce more than what you do in 9-10 hours a day, then that's a success.
But if why not deal with the actual facts, which is that at least if you go by the current state of the French economy, there is a worldwide recognition that it needs to be changed a little bit.
But that has to look at the larger crisis that Europe has, which is not only about welfare, but a lot of other issues, like cooking up their books, for example.
I think I might disagree, but this will get into a very extended discussion.
I think your point is you don't have to work longer hours to be productive.
That I agree.
I think that's the point you're making, that you can actually be a lot more productive in 7 hours, right? So the number of hours is not a key factor.
That point I agree.
Yeah.
I think the disagreement I will have is that we should by fiat declare what's the maximum number of hours, but certainly with less hours you can be more productive. Depends on the person, depends on the environment, depends on the tools he is given.
Let me clarify, because what I'm trying to say is that...
I have to use my authority here.
Okay.
No, because there are quite a few other questions. There's still time later. If you are smart enough, you can ambush the minister outside, right? But at this point, thank you. Let's agree to disagree. Yes, next person.
Good evening. I'm from the Faculty of Engineering. I'm a master's student. My question is basically, my name's Amir. I'm sorry about that. So it was very interesting that you talked about how long-term planning is the backbone of the current prosperity that we have in Singapore. And I think I would largely agree with that. So my question is basically about what sort of political system would be best suited to achieve or enable long-term planning? Because from what you have discussed based on the other questions before, it seems to me that you think that a strident political opposition or a more critical press is a hindrance to long-term thinking.
No, that's not my point. I won't agree with that statement. No.
So do you think there's anything that could be done in Singapore that would would strengthen this long-term thinking process within the government? Or
this is something I've thought about quite often. This is going to take a bit of time. Okay.
It's your time.
It's your time as well. People often ask me, do you believe in the one-party system? What do you think of the democracies? And I say, rather than going into theories, you must look at what works and what has worked. Can you make a proposition that one-party systems or dictatorships or autocracies work better than democracies? I don't think so. Because after the Second World War, and let's restrict ourselves to the period after Second World War, you look at countries. You look at how some went into multi-party democracy, some went into military dictatorship, some went into one-party system. Uniformly, all those which were dictatorships, military or otherwise, or one-party systems, eventually, well, very quickly all failed. Africa, Latin America didn't become independent after Second World War, but you know the history. Asia, bad. Because total power, absolute power, did corrupt absolutely. People in power used that power to enrich themselves and their families. You don't need to name countries. You name any country, you look at the history. At the same time, does that mean that multi-party democracy delivered answers? No, either. You look at every country that had multi-party democracy, also failed as far as I'm concerned, didn't achieve the maximum potential for their people. I think a few countries stand out from this broad characterization. Which are those? Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, and China. Immediately you see this, you say there must be something peculiar about this. And even there, Singapore is sui generis, because it's really very small. But if you look at the other three, you had varying degrees of, I think, corruption. But nevertheless, what they managed to have is political stability. So, and with that political stability, they were able to deliver astounding economic growth. China, for all the complaints people have, between 1980 and today, has moved 500 million people in 30 years out of poverty. So sometimes I tell people, India is a democracy. In 1980, it had, per capita, it was richer than China. Today, if you look at the statistics, the average number of years that an Indian child spends in school is about 4.5, compared with almost full literacy for the average Chinese child. Infant mortality in India is 16%, 1 in 6 children. So you are here in an engineering faculty in the nice halls, we can debate theories. But if you are on the ground, if you are a child, using one of the jurisprudential theories, if you are outside of this world, unborn child deciding where to be born, I think you will choose to be born in China rather than India today. Because first of all, it's more likely that you will be born alive. And then second, it's almost certain that you will get a good education. And third, your economic prospects, regardless of who you are, or which aspect of the socio-economic system you are brighter. That's what matters to most people. But that is not, therefore, an elegy or a support of an autocratic or dictatorship system. I'm simply describing to you what has happened. In these countries, somehow, you managed to get leaders and political stability over a period of time that allowed them to plan long-term and develop the entire country, create the infrastructure, the systems, and then they became democracies, at least South Korea and Taiwan. China hasn't reached that stage yet. Singapore is somewhat different. Small city-state, elections regularly. No other country that became democratic, independent after the Second World War, including India, has held elections regularly. Only Singapore has held elections regularly. Universal franchise right from the beginning. What you had is not something that's capable of theorizing, because we were lucky to get a group of people who thought long-term, who were also charismatic enough to win elections, because to win elections, you got to go and fight for votes. In the 1960s, it was knife edge. They were able to persuade people to support them So you had to have the ability to persuade. You know, a lot of people who are charismatic and have the ability to win elections, however, are not competent in running the government once they get elected. You see that in country after country. But in Singapore, this group of people were also competent. And third, they were also incorruptible. Now, these three combinations was unique. You don't find it anywhere else. So I'm not going to give you a theoretical answer based on systems. I'm just going to say this is why it happened. They were incorruptible and clean. They thought long term. They were tremendously good at what they did, and they were highly persuasive. So we had political stability, and we developed. So the answer going forward, when you have a largely educated population, highly educated, who make up their own minds, I think the task for us is to tell people it doesn't matter who you vote for, but choose good people. Choose people who can deliver, and please vote them in a way that gives political stability. I mean, there is nothing written in stone that 30 years from now, the ruling party would be the same as the ruling party of the past. So it's the people and the core ethos, honesty, integrity, competence, ethics. Who has them? Who creates them? Who doesn't come into government in order to make money? I think our people are smart enough to make those choices.
Yeah, but Minister, if you think that our people are smart enough to make those choices, why do you think it's your task to tell people that?
Because, you know, you need to always talk about the fundamentals of the system, what makes it work, what doesn't make it work, and country after country in the world, I don't have to name names, you just look around, you look at the map, you tell me a political system other than the Scandinavian countries and Switzerland, which you would say is completely something as a model that we would like to follow in terms of being corruption-free, being clean, being efficient, being competent. And then you ask yourself, remove the oil and the resources that some of the Scandinavian countries have, even then, are we in the same position as them? Look at the geostrategic realities, and that answer that question.
Okay. Thank you.
So just to be clear, I'm not saying one party. I'm not saying, political opposition is bad. All I'm saying is good, competent people in government and political stability.
Okay. I know the two of you have this. These two have to be the last questions. But could I please ask you to hold, because there is a related question that has come, that since you are answering this, you might as well take this question. Is there anything you want to add here? No.
I don't think so.
Okay. Then it
sounds almost like his question, which you put in there.
Okay, why don't you ask your question? The lady, please.
Yes, my name is Ong Siu Hua. I'm a teaching staff of the university, and I'm also an entrepreneur. I started a biotech company. So I agree with Minister that very important elements of our success is our economy, as well as a strong government institutions. So our society now is at crossroads in many ways. For example, East-West influences, rapidly aging population, the way social media is. So in addition to what we have always been doing for the success that we want it to be sustainable, a concern that I have, from a scientific kind of a background, is that we kind of need to do things differently because the whole environment is different. So it's really about innovation. But so how do we balance? Because innovation has itself a lot of intrinsic risk. So a very quick second one, if possible, is many times, it looks like our policies are on the basis that, we think that people may take advantage of things. If we give, for example, if we give free healthcare, then people will exploit it. If we, allow the students to do their education over many, many years, then they'll take a long, long time to graduate. But that kind of a thinking, in my opinion, is what causes the strain between people and the government. People want to be trusted, they want to be respected. So again, is there something we can do differently?
I think any government or any country that thinks that everything can be done the same way that has been done in the past is doomed for failure.
Exactly.
We succeeded not because we remained the same from the 60s to the 70s to the 80s to the 90s. If you look through our history, we reinvented ourselves a number of times. And I think we are at one of those inflection points. Quite apart from everything else, globalization is forcing us to rethink. At the same time, the conversations we have been having literally with tens of thousands of Singaporeans in the last 1 year also gives us a real feel for what the Singaporean young, middle-aged, old, what the different perspectives, not that we didn't know, but talking to so many people gives us that. And you're absolutely right. I think in the next phase, with a declining population and with others being able to copy what we do, like we do petrochemical industries, they do petrochemical industries. We want to be an air hub, they can be an air hub. So we need to up our game. Up our game, our people have to become a lot more entrepreneurial, a lot more innovative, and we in the government have got to look at a framework that encourages that. And we have to completely, I think, retool the way we think. That I agree. But certain fundamentals cannot change. One of which is, I think, cleanliness in government, competence in government, an ability to think forward. Those things cannot change. At the same time, I would say integrity as well. Tell the truth, be honest, do the right thing. You might not get everything right, but at least be honest with your people. Never lie to people if you're elected. In that context, do we shy away from universal health care? Do we shy away from welfarism? I think issues like health care, the social degree of social support we give, have been matters of intense debate within cabinet. There are matters that have come up quite substantially in our Singapore conversation. So in a sense, while that is being worked through, I'd rather not touch the topic because a number of ministers who are actively looking at it, talking to Singaporeans, coming up with viewpoints. What I will say is this. We have today in front of us examples of others. What has worked, what hasn't worked. Leave out the welfare systems of Central European states, Western European states. Look at the more successful ones, Denmark, Sweden. Denmark, I don't know if you've been following the debate on welfare, but up to recently it was seen as a model state, takes care of the people who can't work, and at the same time supports entrepreneurial activity, great companies. Seemed like a great model. But there's a serious soul searching going on in Denmark right now. And anyway, Denmark and Singapore, the difference is they have oil, we don't. But subject to that, there is serious soul searching because a left-wing politician talked in terms of this lady who, with a child, without a job, needs to be looked after. And it then blew up, I think, in some degree because when the people understood how the welfare worked, in the first generation, it's almost an honor system. If you can work, you worked. If really you can't work, the society looked after you. But more and more people began to find that the difference in income between working and not working was not much. And therefore, you had articles of people lying in the sun, not working because, I think you might have read the article too, because you're laughing and nodding.
Yes.
And so there is intense debate going on in Denmark. Now that's not to say that we therefore shun welfare. I tell a lot of people, we are a very welfarist state with a very capitalist rhetoric. Because you take off the skin, and look below, education, primary and secondary school, housing, a huge subsidy. You will read some articles which say that it's left pocket to right pocket. That's untrue. Land, I should know, is treated as part of the state reserves. The current government, which was elected in May 2011, has got to buy that land from its current revenue. The money that it pays doesn't go into the government's coffers. It gets locked up in the reserves for future generations. So it costs us a market value to buy that land. We are buying it from the reserves. Valuation done by the chief valuer. We then build on it, and then we sell. And the subsidies are very substantial. And therefore, a large number of Singaporeans, everyone who buys land, buys a flat from the government, sits on a huge subsidy. And if you don't own a car and you live in a public flat, by and large, you have gotten a substantial transfer to the government, much more than what you pay in taxes. There's a lot of welfarism that goes on in that way. Should we do more? I think there is a strong case for arguing that, because the wealth gap, the income gap is such, no society can be coherent and cohesive if there are too large a gap. You need to help people move up. You need to help people go up. But there are challenges. We depend on investments. We depend on the brightest people coming here because they create jobs for others. If we put their taxes up too much, there are other places they can go to. So how do we help people more at the bottom in terms of economic wage scale, say bottom 20%, 30%? How can we help them more? How can we help them upgrade without destroying the work ethic and without destroying economic vitality? Those are the challenges. I'm not disagreeing with you, but it's got to be within a framework.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you.
Okay, yes.
Hello, Mr. Minister. I am Norman Lim. I am an economics major here at NUS. I have two questions. The first being that you mentioned that the success of the Singapore government has been that it is very forward-looking and very long-term in its
I
outlook.
did say it is a success that is of government and people working together.
Yes.
Government alone cannot achieve any success.
Yes, that's true. But some of the recent policies taken has been the diversification of the Singapore economy, such as, say, the pharmaceutical industry. But it hasn't really produced the number of jobs that perhaps the government expected it to, because you don't really need that many people to do research. So could you give me a few concrete examples of a few industries that the government plans to expand and it believes can provide more employment for Singaporeans? And my second question is related to the previous speaker. He mentioned about entrepreneurship in Singapore. And to me, entrepreneurship is a culture of risk-taking, so I'm not sure how much the Singapore government can promote using a top-down approach, risk-taking in the Singapore...
Risk-taking has got to come from people.
Yes.
Yes.
But I have heard somewhere that, that a social security net allows people to feel safer and therefore take more risks. So perhaps if Singapore implemented some unemployment insurance and social security benefits, could it then create a culture of entrepreneurship? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Minister, just so that you know, we've got another 5 minutes more. So if you could just give a brief answer to this. But then I've got a question that I want to ask you. So you've got to keep this answer brief so you can answer my question better?
I think he has asked two questions. The first one, really, I think governments are not the best at choosing which industries can succeed. I think the primary, you can broadly try and plan and create incentives and so on as you see trends going. And I think governments have to do it, and by and large, the trends we spotted and identified have worked out, have created jobs. You look at the financial industry, you look at the shipping industry. Of course, that was always there, but we spotted some additional advantages. The decision to make ourselves an air hub. Lots more examples can be given. But the real answer to your first question is you educate your people. Get them educated. They must be able to face whatever challenges that come to deal with. Yeah? The second question you asked about unemployment insurance and so on, I think, again, I would prefer not to go into detail because these are all ideas that have come up that are being discussed at the Singapore conversation. I'm not saying all those ideas are going to be accepted because anything that you do, you got to, at the end of the day, pay for. I mean, there's no such thing as, it just materializes. If you've got to pay for, then it's got to come from taxes. Then you've got to look at the big picture, and then you've got to look at the sustainability of the taxes. And then you saw the demographics. So we've got to plan all these things. So whatever you do, universal healthcare, universal unemployment insurance, other kinds of things. There are many good ideas. You've got to work and implement what you can honestly believe is implementable based on a 10, 15-year projection, based on your income stream, expenditure, tax revenues, demographics, what is doable. But I do believe that government has got to encourage more risk-taking, encourage a more risk-taking culture. Precisely how that is to be done, I think those are some things that we need to think about. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Minister, please have a seat.
Thank you.
Water. Okay, this has to be the last question, and the question is this. Since you brought up the issue of integrity in leadership, I'd like to ask you this question about Dr. Vivian Balakrishna's statement in Parliament about the indictment of the Workers' Party, the suggestion that the Workers' Party members who are running the town council, Aljunied, Hougang and Punggol East, were less than honest. In fact, the exact words used were that they were untruthful, that they lied. To what extent would you agree with that point of view? Was that a point of view held by Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan and NEA, or is that a view that you share as well? And if so, what are the reasons?
I don't really want to go into the dispute in detail. Dr. Balakrishnan made a few simple points. The town council asked for more money to do a certain type of cleaning. The hawkers confirm it. Mr. Tai, who's I think the deputy property manager or property manager of the town council, is recorded in the notes. He asked for more money. He said, "We won't clean unless you pay more money." The hawkers then put up a petition. The matter became public. I think it was to some extent embarrassing because the town council is seen to have demanded money for something that it should not have. The quantum involved was not huge, but the principle of it, that you are seeking to make money from people who didn't need to pay and had already paid. And then two of the MPs, chairman and vice chairman of the town council, denied ever asking for money. So it was fairly straightforward. You have the hawkers saying it, you have got the minutes and the notes saying it. And Mr. Tai has not been asked and he hasn't been produced. He has not come out to deny that he asked for money. And the two MPs went on record to say that the town council didn't ask for money. You then had in Parliament Dr. Balakrishnan producing all these documents, fairly incontrovertible and unarguable, black and white. You had a quotation from the subcontractor asking for money. And the response by Mr. Lau, whom Dr. Balakrishnan said, you are an honorable man, you ought to go and look at this, is that I haven't seen these documents before and I haven't spoken with Mr. Tai before. And the next day he said, let's move on. So I think people can form their own conclusions. Prime Minister has, I think, issued a statement. Obviously, when Dr. Balakrishnan stands up and makes a statement like that, the cabinet has looked at it. And no minister will make such a statement without the entire cabinet endorsing it, and the entire cabinet believing in the truth of the statement.
But there's also a sense that this is political and that it's politically motivated, not so much a question of integrity, and that the PAP government or PAP or the PAP members in Parliament are actually badgering. How would you respond to that?
There will certainly be people who take that view. I think the real answer to that is all the documents out there lined up, just read them, and then you can decide whether it's true or untrue. Don't form impressions without reading the documents. Read the minutes, read the notes, ask yourself, Mr. Tai hasn't responded. One of the two MPs didn't say a word in Parliament in response to the allegation. And they say move on. I think this much this audience and every audience will agree. If a PAP MP has lied in public, I think all of you will find it unacceptable. And all of you will expect the Prime Minister to investigate, and if indeed the allegation is true, you will expect the person to resign. I'm talking about PAP MPs. That is what is expected of us. That's a system of integrity that we have run. I think that's all I need to say.
Right. Thank you for your candid response, Minister. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Minister K Shanmugam.
I think for work I've been given a PhD.
That was a slip. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd now like to call upon the Dean of our NUS Law Faculty, Professor Simon Chesterton, because he wants Chesterton to give something special. Simon, you want to say something first, right?
I will. Well, I don't think this needs to go live where I will. I have questions myself, but I might save it for another night. I think you've worked hard enough. The Minister, as you all know, is an alumnus of NUS and a tremendous supporter of the university. Indeed, it's only a couple of weeks ago that he gave another speech at the other campus, the Bukatima campus, although since it was launching a book on diplomacy and held at the Faculty of Law, I think the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister for Laws kind of had to do it, but it was greatly appreciated. And as we were walking out of the event, we have the graduation photos from every class that's graduated from the law school. And the Minister who graduated from the class of 1984 observed that he didn't actually have a copy of the class of 1984 photograph. And so we thought, as we prepare for next year, your 30th anniversary, it might be a nice gesture to present you with a copy of that photograph with our thanks for your support of the university generally, and in particular for your wonderful and wide-ranging discussion this evening. So, Minister, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Simon. Let me have a look at how he looks.
Well,
where is that? Where is he?
I best not to point out to if you want Kishore's insincere remarks, he looked at it and said, "You have become more handsome now."
He's a liar.
No, it's all relative.
But you see, then again, he served all his life, adult
In
life,
diplomacy.
as a diplomat, right?
Yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you'd agree with me that we may not all agree with all that the minister said tonight. In fact, we shouldn't. And I don't think the minister expects us. But I can say this with a certain amount of authority. I've known this man since we were in secondary 1 in RI,
We won't
many
go
years
into
ago.
that.
We won't go into the details. He's not always such an upright man. Okay, it's not always been. The truth is, I must say, I've always admired him for his ability to be honest. Sometimes, maybe oftentimes, brutally so. And I'm proud to call him a friend, and even more proud to say he is a fellow alumnus of NUS.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is a picture of the two of us.
Ah.
I'm a lot better looking.
You always
It's a
have been
souvenir.
prettier.
And sorry, this is the time when you say something really nice about me.
Is this about you or is this about your life?
What's
Fashion.
the difference? Could you kindly, Minister,
You read it.
read it? I can't read it right, okay. You Alive, I can see, creates a great atmosphere, encourages passionate thinking and debate on issues, helped by my God, he said something nice about me, a great moderator.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And once again, ladies and gentlemen, Minister
Thank
K
you.
Shanmugam for
Thank you.
being candid.
Thank you.
Please
Thank
join
you,
us
Mr.
outside. Thank you.
You might just take this off.